What's up, guys? A 1-2 day yesterday that could have easily been 3-0. Really frustrating with Tulsa, who they're winning the entire game outright. I think they're winning by, I don't know, almost 15 points or something like that with like 8 minutes left in the game. They wound up blowing the entire lead, going into overtime, and still you have an underdog that takes the game into overtime. So you still know it's like pretty much the right side. And no, they still don't cover because it winds up going to intentional free throws and they lose by 7. The final score is not indicative of what went on in that game at all. Tulsa was leading. It was almost like a wire-to-wire outright win for Tulsa. That was complete bullshit. I am extremely angry. Sacramento Kings got there and probably should have hit on the money line in the end of it, and that didn't happen. They wound up losing in overtime on a Damian Lillard buzzer beater 3 at the very end of, I think it was overtime, right? Yeah, at the very end of overtime. So Kings still cover, but it was like, I don't even know what to say, man. It was that close to being a money line underdog cash on that one, and the money line didn't quite get there, even though the main play won. So, I mean, that's fine. That's good. I'll take that. It would have been a winning day then if either Tulsa got there or the Detroit Lions got there. But also, no, the Detroit Lions were winning and covering almost wire to wire in that one. And the Rams kick a field goal. I don't know. The second half was like, I think the second half was 6-3 Rams in the entire second half. I don't know how, with those two offenses and those two teams that lack defense to such a degree, I don't know how you have a 6-3 half. Detroit, like I said, they were winning the entire game. And then, that Rams kick a field goal, I don't know, with whatever it was, like 8 minutes left, maybe less than that or something, when they needed a touchdown to take the lead, and they still kicked the field goal to cut it to 1, which is like, I mean, I guess it makes sense because you can get the ball back and then kick another field goal, but it's so frustrating. The Rams did out-yard the Lions, I think, but the Lions had the lead the whole game. It looked like a cover. After the Lions went up 7-0, they were covering the entire way until the Rams got back to within it with that final field goal there. It's so ridiculous. I hate it. I think it should have been a cover for the Lions. The Rams were just such a square underdog, man. It was so ridiculous. You could tell the Lions were up for that game emotionally. Sam Laporta actually played in that game. I think it got a touchdown, which I thought he had torn his ACL. I thought he was definitely not playing in that game, but apparently he did. All of it is just so maddening. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. I don't know if there's anything else to say about that. And it just pissed me off further with the Lions' possession at the end of the first half, where it looked like they were going to at least maybe get a field goal attempt out of it. Roofed stadiums, you can kick longer field goals there. And that one call there where the Lions were trying to draw the Rams off sides on a 4th and 5, and they succeeded in doing so. And there was still like over a minute left in the half. So it would have given the Lions a first down, and they would have almost definitely gotten a field goal, maybe even more. When at that point, I think they were up 4 at that point, which is then what it wound up being going into halftime. But it also gave the Rams an extra possession, but they did punt them deep into their own territory, so the Rams didn't score again. But that call was absolutely ridiculous. The Rams completely jumped across the line of scrimmage before anybody on Detroit moved. It was obvious in real time, like to any viewer, it was completely obvious, like, holy shit, this actually worked. They got the Rams to jump off sides, and the refs called it a false start on the Lions. It's one of the worst calls I've ever seen. And then, I think in the second half, there was a bad call going the other way on, it looked like Detroit tugged Nakua's jersey on one of those plays. I hate these refs in the NFL, man. It's just so stupid. And then I guess the other thing I'll mention is that with the Rams, like, one of their biggest weaknesses is the run defense. I don't know how Detroit had like virtually no rushing attack in the entire second half. They had almost no yards on the ground with Montgomery. I think they had Montgomery and Gibbs both playing in that game. Right? I don't know how, because they ran the ball. They had a pretty good offense in the first half. Nice balanced attack. They were scoring. They didn't look like they're that easy to stop at all. And then in the second half, completely changed. I guess both defenses kind of adjusted. But in the second half, it was just ridiculous how few rushing yards the Lions were able to get when that was like part of the key to the game was like the Lions are going to be able to run the ball against the Rams' weakness there, which was the case in the first half, but not in the second. Totally ridiculous. Moving on to today, we got college basketball. I'm not playing any of these games. It's a lot of smaller conference games, just nothing really interests me that much. I think Iowa is potentially not in a great spot because they're coming off a nice win over Nebraska, which is a pretty big win because Nebraska's been playing pretty well. They pretty much knocked the doors off of them. And that was a game where I wanted to lay the points with Iowa, but the number was just too high. But I did wind up just grabbing the money line on Iowa because I can't help it when Nebraska's in such a letdown spot off of Purdue. I had to just do something. And Nebraska's travel situation, I think, was kind of thrown off because of the blizzard. I think they might have gotten there a little bit late. So maybe their preparation time is a little bit less too. Iowa's now going to Minnesota, and in their only other road conference game, they lost by double digits at Wisconsin. They have played a few other road games this year, and they've lost all of them. So they have no road wins on the year. And they have Purdue up next in 5 days. So it is a look ahead for Iowa. It's definitely a tough spot having to go into Minnesota. Minnesota just lost to Indiana, which is pretty ugly because Indiana is definitely down this year. And I think people don't realize it yet because they're third in the Big Ten right now. Somehow, I don't know how. Minnesota, I think their record makes them look better than they are either because I think they had some easy games in the out-of-conference schedule as well. But Minnesota does have Michigan State up next, so I don't know. I don't know if that's going to be any sort of look ahead or whatever, but I don't know. They might be focused on Iowa. One thing that keeps me off of it is that Minnesota does have the better record than Iowa, so it looks like Minnesota should potentially be favored in this game, and they are. They're actually up from a pick 'em to a 3, which I think has gone too far because Ken Pom has neither of these teams ranked very well. He has Iowa ranked like 40 spots ahead of Minnesota, though, so there's no way I could like 3 with Minnesota at home, even though the home court advantage in situations like this is pretty strong, and Minnesota is in the better spot, I think, coming off a bad loss, whereas Iowa is coming off a pretty nice win, and they have a big game against Purdue next, but Minnesota has a big game against Michigan State next. Ken Pom has this game at 1. Actually, he has Iowa -1 in this. I'm just staying away. No, thank you. I'll stay away from that. In the NBA, I got one play. I'll comment on a few of these games just because there are games where the line looks like it's way, way off, and I'll try to explain why because I think I have the explanation for most of these. New Orleans, Dallas is in a zigzag, and New Orleans just won at Dallas in the previous game. They were coming off a pretty crazy stretch of games where they won by 30-something at Sacramento. Then they won by almost 30 again at Golden State. Then they lost a tough game at Denver. Then after that, they were able to go into Dallas and beat Dallas. Now they're repeating that game against Dallas. But in the first game, Dallas was a 5.5-point favorite. New Orleans won as an underdog. So you look at this and you think, well, this is a zigzag now. So I'd have a tendency to want to lay the points with the Dallas Mavericks in this game, right? No, not so fast, because wait a minute. The line is up from Pelicans 3 to 4.5 here. How has the line moved like 10 points from where it was in the previous matchup in the same venue? That's because the Mavericks have like 5 players out in this game, including 2 of their starters, including Luka, who's obviously their star. I think he's out in this game, and Jones is also out in this game. I think it's Jones. So they have 2 starters not playing in this game, including the guy who is sort of like their entire team. So that's the explanation for why the line has moved so much, because otherwise this line would make absolutely no sense. Even though the Pelicans won the previous game, there's no way the line's going to move 10 points just off of recency bias. So because the Pelicans won that first game, that's kind of a lopsided result. My lean would still be to the Mavericks. Even with all the injuries, I would lean to taking the points with the Mavericks here because I think the line is just too much of an overreaction to this. So I think it's kind of that injured player theory type of spot. Plus, it's a zigzag. Dallas has 56% of the tickets and 55% of the cash zone. It does look like the line is moving further up on the Pelicans, but that could just be because of the injury news and stuff and who's out in this game. It's tough to play a game like this. In the NBA, you have so many situations where you don't know who's in and who's out. I hate stuff like that. So I would lean to the Mavericks, though, just playing the fact that I think this line is just overreacted too much to the previous game's result and the players who are not playing for Dallas, but I don't want to quite get involved in that because it's so messy and there's so much going on there. You have Brooklyn Nets are down from 2.5 to 2 at home against the Miami Heat, and that doesn't look right either. Why are the Nets favored at home against the Heat? I believe Jimmy Butler is not playing in this game, so I would be careful about that game as well, because it looks really suspicious to take the Nets, but it's also pretty obvious that a line of Nets being a 2-point favorite against the Heat, even we know the Heat are the better team, but they're not just slightly the better team, they're significantly better than the Nets are, and the records also kind of tell you that that is the case, but I don't think the records are really misindicating you in this case. I think the Heat got off to kind of a bad start. The Heat are definitely the better team here, but this line shouldn't really be where it is. I think it should be like the Heat, maybe a small favor here if Butler was playing. I believe if Butler is playing, I believe he is not playing in this game. So that's why that line looks weird. That's why it is where it is. And Thunder Lakers, with the Lakers favored by 1. I also will point out the Nets haven't played since that Paris game, but they lost the Paris game. I'll talk about the Paris game in a second. They lost to Cleveland in Paris, so they've had some time off. So that might be an advantage to the Nets, though, even though they're returning from Paris. If they lost that game and they haven't been playing that well, having the extra couple of days off might help them like refocus. So I don't know what I would want to do in that game, to be honest, because then you have the aspect of where is the line like overreacting to Butler being out? I don't know. Thunder Lakers is also an injury situation. That's why the Lakers are favored by 1. The Thunder are definitely the way better team. And you know about my history with bucking the Thunder. I think I've only won once going against them the whole time, maybe no times this year. I don't want to go against the Thunder are on my do not fade list because they just win in every situation where they're in a bad spot. And in this one, the Lakers are favored by 1 because the Thunder are going to be without Gilgeous-Alexander in this one, who is obviously their best player, their star player, because otherwise there's no way the Lakers would be favored in this game, even though they are at home. The Thunder are more than just slightly the better team against the Lakers, so that's why this line is where it is. I'm not going to get involved in this game or the Heat game. I don't want to play against a team who's down. Even though like the line looks suspicious, you might be like, wait, what's going on here? Is it a trap? I don't know. This is like, especially in the NBA, this is the problem with like blindly like trying to find like trap lines like this. You got to look at who's in and who's out in the NBA because teams rest guys. Players are out with injuries and they kind of more often because teams kind of want to rest players in certain spots as well. So they might show up on the injury report, but they're actually also being like rested and it's just kind of like a slight injury where maybe they play in a different situation. It's all really crazy. So those games have injuries, whatever. The game I'm actually on, though, in the NBA, I'm taking the Chicago Bulls. I almost said the Bears. +4 against the Cleveland Cavaliers. I think this is a bad spot for the Cleveland Cavs. Cavs have 89% of the tickets and 75% of the cash. I don't think there are, like, huge injury situations involved in this game. I think this is a game where the line just kind of is where it is. It kind of makes sense. Cleveland, they've had 3 days off because they just last played in the NBA Paris game, which is kind of a crazy, weird scheduling situation. It's a big game, kind of, just because you get to go out to Paris and play that game. And Cleveland won the game. They beat Brooklyn. They've won 4 games in a row, and they've won 6 of their last 8. But now they're returning off of that Paris game, which is kind of a big deal just because it's kind of a weird game where you get to go to Europe. You get to showcase what you have to offer out there across the pond, let's say. And then you get to come back, and I think that it's a momentum stopper, though. If you're on like a big win streak and then you have a nice game there, too, and then you have these days off, I think that might halt their momentum. And this win streak isn't as good as it might look, too, because the best win on that entire one, the only good win in that entire 8-game stretch where they won 6 games was the win at Dallas by 3. Otherwise, they beat Chicago at Chicago, which is whatever. They lost to Milwaukee, but yeah, Milwaukee's a really good team. They lost at Toronto, which doesn't look very good. And then they beat Washington twice and San Antonio. So none of those wins are impressive at all. Now they've had all this time off, coming back from Paris off a nice win in the big Paris game, and they have Milwaukee on deck in 2 days, which is a bigger game, and it's a game where they just lost to Milwaukee on December 29th, so of course you're probably going to show up for Milwaukee. You're going to focus on Milwaukee kind of regardless of what the situation is, just because it is Milwaukee, but Also, they did just lose to Milwaukee at home not long ago. So I think they're going to be focused on that game. They might overlook Chicago, and adding to that fact is the fact that they won at Chicago on December 23rd. So that's the last time they played them. They went into Chicago and beat them in their house. So I think this is not a good spot for Cleveland, man. It's a look ahead to Milwaukee. They're coming off the Paris game, which kind of makes it a little bit of a sandwich. And I think that extra rest might be a stopper of momentum in this case, whereas the Chicago, the situation they're in, I think they might kind of be in a momentum like starting type of situation. They've been playing actually decent recently. They've won 4 of the last 5, but none of it was really impressive because it was 2 wins against Charlotte, one of them in overtime. Then they beat Houston in overtime, which was the best win out of that stretch. They lost to Golden State, but put up a decent showing and losing by 9. And then in their last game, they were able to win again, though, and it was not a really good-looking win. They only beat San Antonio by 6, which is not impressive. Chicago was actually favored by 6.5, and they had a bigger lead in that game and blew the lead and then had to kind of refocus themselves to put it away. So that might actually even be a scare, almost losing to a team like San Antonio, who was one of the bottom teams in the NBA. So that might refocus Chicago. And because they won that game, it might like help start their momentum again a little bit because they were able to get out of that game with the win. You get some winning momentum out of it again because you had a loss the game before that. You only have had one day off, which in this case I think might help Chicago's momentum a little bit. Going into Cleveland, you don't really have much left on the horizon. This is kind of a big game because Cleveland beat you in your house not that long ago, and they have a better record than you. I like the spot for Chicago, so that's what I'm on. I'm on the Chicago Bulls +4. I think it's a much better situational spot for Chicago than it is for Cleveland. Cleveland is, of course, ahead of them in the standings, too, in their division. Cleveland might not pay as much attention to Chicago. Chicago will pay to Cleveland because Cleveland's 5 games ahead of them in the division. So that's what I'm doing there. And then in the NHL, it was tough to kind of find a spot that I wanted to actually go with in the NHL. I think Boston, my Bruins, are in a bad spot, and they're down from -185 to -167 on the money line with 74% of the tickets on them, but 60% of the cash on the New Jersey Devils. So it's like, well, the market read, it definitely looks like it's on the Devils here. There's a reverse line movement against the public Bruins moving down, and cash discrepancy way on the Devils. Bruins not in a good spot because they're returning home from a road trip, a 4-game road trip where every single game went into overtime or shootout, losing to Colorado in shootout, losing in overtime to Arizona, losing in overtime to Vegas, and then winning in overtime to St. Louis. So this is a tough spot, man, tough spot. And they have Colorado up next. So are they going to be looking ahead to that? I don't know if you're going to quite overlook New Jersey, though, when well, I don't know. I mean, New Jersey has a decent record, but the Bruins did beat New Jersey the last time they played them on December 30th. They beat them at home 5-2. And the game before that, they lost at New Jersey in overtime on December 13th. So 1-1 in their last 2. So the last game they played, they did beat New Jersey by 3 goals. So that might be a little bit of an extra motivator for New Jersey there. New Jersey, however, is coming they're in a tough stretch of games too, man. They just beat Florida. They went down on the Florida leg there, the Florida stretch. They had lost to Vancouver only by 2. Then they went down to Tampa Bay, lost in overtime. Tough game there. And then they beat Florida 4-1. So even though I do think they'll still be focused on the Bruins here, they might be in like a high and mighty type of situation there. So unfortunately, I just can't quite do it. I don't want to get involved in New Jersey when they're coming off a huge win over the Florida Panthers themselves, but the spot is worse for the Bruins, returning home from a road trip where they played all overtime games there, and they have Colorado up next and beat New Jersey the last time they played them. So there are more situational aspects of this that point to the New Jersey side, but I'm just not going to quite get involved in that one. But it is a bad spot there. And then St. Louis is in a bad spot as well. They are up from -105 to -113 at home, though. And they have 58% of the tickets on them, but it looks like 98% of the cash is on the other side on Philadelphia. I don't quite understand that. I don't know how there's such a cash discrepancy on Philadelphia, or more than that, I don't really understand why the public would be on St. Louis because Philadelphia has the better record. So I'm not sure that those percentages are quite accurate there. St. Louis is in a bad spot because they just beat the New York Rangers, and then they played tough again against Boston, my Bruins, and lost in overtime in that final game of the road trip for the Bruins there. St. Louis played them real tough, played them to overtime. So St. Louis might not have that much left in the tank, but it is Philadelphia coming in, and they have a good record. And you just have Washington up next for 2 games in a row. So I don't know. It's possible St. Louis is still going to bring some focus for a Philadelphia team that has a decent record here. In Philadelphia, then you look at what spot they're in. They're not in a good spot either. They're playing the third straight road game. Which is also a third game in 4 days, all in different cities. They played the first one into overtime against Minnesota, and the game before that was a shootout against Montreal. And this is actually a 4th game in 6 days now, all in different cities, because that was at home, even though Montreal's not good. So maybe that was that would have like an aspect to it where it might scare Philadelphia back into focus. But then they lost in overtime at Minnesota. But then in their last game on the back-to-back, they went into Winnipeg and won as a big underdog. I think Winnipeg was like minus 200 money line in that game. That's a huge win for Philly, even though it's an out-of-conference game. They beat like one of the hottest teams in hockey, one of the teams with the best records in hockey. You go in and you beat them in your house, and you have Dallas up next. So I don't want to play Philadelphia in this spot either, man. Neither Philadelphia nor St. Louis is in a good spot there, unfortunately. I think the stronger out of all 4 of those plays that I just mentioned would be to take the New Jersey Devils. But the game that I'm actually on, it's a bit of a momentum play, but I also think that Pittsburgh is not in the best spot. So I am fading the Pittsburgh Penguins here. And even though it looks like the Penguins are up from minus 135 to minus 145 on the money line, it does look like they have 69% of the tickets, but 55% of the cash is on the other side on Seattle. So it looks like Pittsburgh actually is in a situation where they have kind of the public action on them, it looks like. But the cash discrepancy is on Seattle. Seattle's on a huge win streak, man. So you might think that they might tend to be like a little bit of a public team, but the public likes the Pittsburgh Penguins. They like the name of the Pittsburgh Penguins. And the fact that the Penguins have a better record than Seattle does. And maybe they're taking Pittsburgh to bounce back here off of 2 losses, because Pittsburgh was pretty hot for a while before that. They've had 2 losses in a row, but this is kind of why I'm going against Pittsburgh here, because those were both overtime games. They played Vancouver at home on the 11th and lost in overtime. And then they just went to Carolina, another big opponent there, and lost that game in overtime. Carolina tends to be a pretty good defensive team in the recent years. That's a tough loss, man. You lose that game, and Pittsburgh has Vegas up next, the returning champs, in 5 days. So they might be looking ahead to Vegas and looking ahead to having a little bit of rest after this game here. So I don't know if they're going to be totally focused on Seattle, even though they have lost 2 games in a row. They're coming off, those games are both tough, man. And I think they might be looking forward to some rest after maybe heal up a little bit before they have to face Vegas, the returning champs there. So it's possible they overlook Seattle, who is actually the least of the teams in that entire stretch of games there. Carolina has a really good record. Vancouver has a really good record. They played Philadelphia before that. Philadelphia has a better record than Seattle as well, and so does Vegas, even though Vegas has been playing a little bit worse since they've run into some injuries there. And Seattle is the hottest team in hockey, but I still think they're kind of like almost flying under the radar a little bit, man, because their record was so bad before they entered that stretch. But Seattle, they're playing really good. They're playing really good hockey right now, playing really well. They've won 8 games in a row, and a lot of them have been on the road too. Or excuse me, I think they've won 9 games in a row now, and 6 of them have been on the road. It's just a crazy stretch that they're in, but I think they're in the better rest spot here, because the most recent games that they played were not as like brutal of games. They beat Washington pretty easily on the 11th, 4-1, even though all these games are on the road. Yes. And they do have the New York Rangers up next tomorrow. That is also true, but are they going to overlook a Pittsburgh Penguins team that's also carrying a decent amount of, that has a lot of name recognition with them? I don't know. I don't think they'll overlook Pittsburgh after, especially with having had a couple of games that don't matter as much. They beat Washington, and then they beat Columbus 2 days ago, also by 3 goals, which that's not really that. Those games aren't really impressive games, and I don't know if they had to really put in like max efforts in those games, really. So I like it here. They're getting an underdog price here, and they're on a huge win streak here. And Pittsburgh is coming off 2 way more brutal games than the games that Seattle just played. I don't know who's starting in this game, because Decord has been playing in net, or Dakal has been playing in net for Seattle. He's been really, really good. over this stretch of games here. I don't know if he's actually going to play in this game because he's going to have to rest at some point. It looks like he's at least none of it is confirmed yet. It looks like he's still at least scheduled to play in this game. It looks like it's going to be Jarry for Pittsburgh, Jarry played their last two of those. I'm not sure that it's really going to be Jarry because he played both of those really tough games that they just played. So they might bring Nedeljkovic back in there, but I don't really know. I don't even know which one of them is the one that I would prefer to have in there when I'm going against Pittsburgh, to be honest. They both have like similar stats. So I don't know. We don't know. It's not confirmed who the starting goalies are, but Decord has been playing like every game for Seattle, and he's been really, really good over this recent stretch. So Seattle, they're a hot team. I don't think they're really a team you want to go against. And you're getting an underdog price with them, and Pittsburgh is in a pretty rough spot there. So I'm on the Seattle Kraken. I don't even know how you pronounce it at this point, but whatever it is. So those are my plays today. And then, I forgot to talk about NHL. We got to talk about that quickly. Oh, man. I hate how these videos all go longer than I kind of want them to here. I thought it was going to be quicker because of the it's a little bit of a smaller card on a Monday. Happy MLK Day, by the way, everybody. So I am on one play in the NFL. I'm on the Philadelphia Eagles, although that's actually in the night game, but it's listed first in the it's listed first on the board here because they moved the Steelers-Bills game to today, and it originally was not going to be today, but now it's this afternoon. Eagles-Buccaneers, I'm on the Eagles. They're up from 2.5 to 3, but it looks like with reduced juice. I don't know if you can still get the 2.5 on them. You might be able to play a decent money line price on them as well if that's the way you want to go with them. I laid 2.5 with the Eagles. 52% of the cash and of the tickets on the Buccaneers right now, so it's tough to say where the cash discrepancy is going to be. I think the public is really off of the Eagles, though, because I explained this in my NFL video, my wild card video. If you want to go look at that video, the Eagles, they, everybody just hates what they saw out of the Eagles down the stretch, but I think you can kind of chalk some of that up to that final Giants game. The Eagles knew that they were going to be locked into the 5 seed at that point pretty much. So even though they played their starters at the beginning of the game, which they shouldn't have because Jalen Hurts dislocated his finger, and A.J. Brown might have already been out coming into that game. I think he already had the injury. I don't know. But they really did not have that much to play for. And then, of course, their starters came out. So I don't think you can take much away from the result of that last game against the Giants. When Philadelphia played the Giants on Christmas, they actually blew the Giants out statistically, even though the final score actually was close, but the game was not that close. And Tyrod Taylor wound up coming into that game. And Philadelphia looks like they don't really know how to stop these mobile quarterbacks. They weren't ready for them. So I think that kind of factors into what happened in that game. Philadelphia still won the game. And then I think that kind of was the case again against Arizona. Arizona is they're a much better team with Kyler Murray and James Conner in there and healthy, which was the case in that game. Philadelphia had a huge lead in that game. Then I think they kind of started taking Arizona lightly maybe. And Arizona came all the way back and shocked them and won. But again, Philadelphia not good at slowing down mobile quarterbacks. And that's not what they're going to be seeing in this one. Baker Mayfield, not a mobile quarterback. And if you watched that last game against the Carolina Panthers, he was hobbling around a bit, man. So I don't know that his leg is 100%. I don't like that aspect of it. So people are talking about how injured the Eagles are, but the Buccaneers aren't exactly the healthiest. And people are talking about how bad the Eagles looked in that final stretch of games there, but they're not talking about how bad the Buccaneers looked. The Buccaneers looked awful in their last 2 games. And in those games, they had to win at least one of those to get into the playoffs. So they were in games where they had to play well, and they didn't. They got blown out at home by the New Orleans Saints, which was a game I was on the Saints. And then in the final week, they pretty much had to win to make sure they were going to win their division. And they were playing Carolina, who's one of the worst teams in football, and they only beat them 9-0. And the final almost was 9-7 in that game. So I think Carolina turned it over right near the goal line or something, 9-0. Everybody's just completely giving them a pass on that one and overlooking that game. That's a terrible performance in a game that you need to win. And you only beat Carolina 9-0. So everybody's focused on how bad and how banged up the Eagles are, but nobody's focused on the same thing for the Buccaneers. So it's like the narrative is just misplaced, which was kind of a similar thing with the Lions, who I think should have covered, like I said. So when you have the narrative is entirely focused on one side of the game and not on the other side, it tends to create kind of this like imbalance in like the perception. So that's what I think was going on in that Lions game. And that's, I think, what's going on in this game too. So that's the way I look at this one. And then the Eagles have way more experience, man. I would want to be on the side of the Eagles. I don't trust Baker Mayfield in a playoff situation like this. The Eagles have been here multiple times at this point. A lot of these guys played and got to the Super Bowl last year. Sirianni, the coach, was, of course, the coach going into the Super Bowl last year, even though they're now with new defensive and offensive coordinators. I still like the Eagles better in this game. And the Eagles, when they beat the Buccaneers during the regular season this year, that game wasn't even as close as the score looked. The Eagles were like a 4.5 point favorite in that one, and they're only maybe a 3-point favorite here. I don't think that much has changed since then, although A.J. Brown is going to be out in this game. I don't know that he's worth 1.5 points or whatever. But I did think the Eagles were being overvalued in that game a little bit. But now the perception is completely off of the Eagles. Now, the perception was too high on them when they were winning a lot of games at the beginning of the season, and now it's too low on them after they've looked really bad at the end of the season. So I think the reality is somewhere in the middle there. And the Eagles, the reality is the Eagles totally dominated the Buccaneers in that game. Like in the trenches, the Eagles had the advantage. The Eagles have way more strength on their lines than the Buccaneers do. So that's an aspect of this game that's being overlooked as well. The Eagles' offensive line, especially, is quite good. And people are overlooking that aspect of it. The Eagles dominated that game against the Buccaneers in the trenches. I think they do have the advantage in the trenches, and that might come into play here. I think as far as like the injury stuff, like Hurts, he's saying he's ready to go. He's had an extra day now because they're not playing until Monday night, so that's going to help them like heal up a bit. We know A.J. Brown is out, and he is their best wide receiver, but Hurts, as far as his dislocated middle finger, yes, it is on his throwing hand. It might have some effect on him, but these guys, and this is the NFL, they pump themselves full of painkillers, steroids, and once they get out there, like you can listen to professional NFL players talk about how, like, what it's like there. It's like once they get out there, sometimes it's like almost like they don't even have that injury anymore. And that was, it's like it doesn't even enter their mind anymore. Like they're just thinking about playing football at that point. And that was kind of what I was doing when I was playing the Chiefs a couple times in the playoffs last year, and everybody was kind of downgrading them too much because of the Mahomes injury. I was like, it's not going to be as much of a factor as people are claiming. So I think that might be the case here with the Eagles. Swift, I don't think there's any problem at all. He missed the last game of the regular season with an illness. I think he's playing. He'll be good to go. And then I think the Devontae Smith, I think he'll be ready to go as well. He had some injury issue, but I think he's going to play in this game. I think he's ready to go. He's fine. So I don't think that's that much to worry about either. And yeah, that's the way that I look at that one. Obviously, I like the Eagles. I'm on the Eagles, especially because of the narrative and the perception. Just everybody's shitting on them at this point. Nobody's giving them a chance. Now they're in the playoffs. It's a chance to reset. You can just ignore everything that happened leading up to this, basically. So that's what I think about that. The line's telling you the Eagles are still the significantly better team, even without A.J. Brown. And I think that is the case. I think that's true. Smith is still a really good wide receiver, and I think the Eagles will still be able to do something. They'll be able to still, I think, get the ball to multiple different receivers here and be able to do something. But I also don't know if the Buccaneers' offense is as good as people think that it is. With Mike Evans there, and people are talking about how good they looked in a couple of games there against Jacksonville. Jacksonville really was not playing that well. And then whatever that other game was the Buccaneers had, they looked quite good. They haven't looked as good in the last 2 games, though. And even though I don't think the Eagles' defense is very trustworthy, even so, I think it's, I don't know. I'm not sure the Buccaneers' offense is going to have it all together either. So I'm on the Eagles there. And then Steelers-Bills, the game that got moved because everybody's a pussy, which the governor of New York actually had them move the game. And it was really because of traffic. Like, Bills fans were in the Bills stadium yesterday, like clearing the snow out of the stadium. They could have played the game. I mean, I think they've played games in similar conditions to this before in Buffalo. It's all just like bitch shit. They did it last year, too, at one point, where they moved one of the Bills games to the Detroit Lions Stadium against the Browns, which is just ridiculous. You're taking the home field advantage away from the Bills, and you do that. At least in this game, The Bills still have the home field advantage. Bills are up from 9.5 to 10, which is similar to what the other game was. The total is sitting at 38.5 now instead of the 34.5 where it was when the game was going to be in worse weather than this is going to be, even though I think it's still going to be a snow game to some extent here, and it's going to be a little bit colder than it was yesterday. But the number on the game is still about the same, sitting at 10. Bills have 69% of the cash and of the tickets up, and the cash just ticked up again to 70%. So the Bills do have a slight cash discrepancy there in the line. Looks like it's kind of moving the direction of the Bills a little bit. I do kind of lean to the Bills just slightly if you force me to pick a side in this one. I still think that the Steelers are just totally overrated, man. And they might be overvalued even a little bit more now because people saw what the 7 seed did yesterday with the Packers, the first 7 seed to win in the expanded playoffs. That was a crazy performance by the Packers, a great performance by the Packers. I don't think we're going to see the same thing out of the Steelers. The Steelers are not a very good team. They've been way overperforming their talent level. I mean, this is still a team that lost to New England, and I mean, this team doesn't quite have it right. That final win that they got against the Ravens were already looking ahead to the playoffs in that one and rested some of their starters. So I don't think there's much you can take away from that result. And it was still an ugly game where the Steelers still had to show up and put in an effort in that one. I don't think the Steelers are very good. I think this is the end of the road for them. The Bills, excuse me, like I said, I think are for real. I think they have a decent chance to make a deep run this year and finally get over the hump. In my bracket, because way too many people are picking the Ravens and the 49ers, I actually have the Bills, who have the third best odds to win the Super Bowl. I actually just took them to win the Super Bowl in my bracket just because it's kind of the game theory type of play there where people are just undervaluing the Bills too much. But they got to get through this game, but I don't think that's going to be much of an issue. I think they'll be able to do it. The Bills really are balanced. They looked worse than they actually are throughout the middle of the season, but they were an extremely undervalued team throughout the middle of the season when it looked like they might not even make the playoffs, and it's that's crazy because the Bills are really, really good. The Josh Allen turnover situation has been what's been hampering them, because other than that, they have an offense that can really move the ball, and their defense is sneaky good. They have a top 5 defense, I think, in the NFL. So very, very balanced team for the Bills this year. And the Steelers really don't have that. The Steelers don't have much. They have Mason Rudolph here playing his first playoff game against a Bills defense that's pretty good. Good luck to Mason Rudolph there. Good luck with that. In a hostile environment, I don't think it's going to go very well for the Steelers in this one. And the Steelers, as we know, are also without TJ Watt. And TJ Watt, even though I don't think a single defensive player really affects the line very much, if any defensive player is going to affect a line maybe upwards of 1 point or even more, it's going to be TJ Watt, man. TJ Watt completely changes the game there. He's probably the single best defensive player in the NFL. Just like his brother JJ was dominant, TJ Watt is a force out there. He completely changes the game. He's a great pass rusher, great tackler, super aggressive. He's injured now because I think he got injured in that Ravens game, which, of course, I mean, he needed to play. The Steelers needed to win that game. But, so he's not going to play, so that's going to hurt the Steelers on defense as well. I think it's going to help the Bills on offense. Of course, they're going to be able to move the ball more easily, knowing that Watt is not going to be in there disrupting a bunch of things. So, yeah, TJ Watt, since the Steelers have had him on the team, the Steelers are 1-10 straight up with him not on the field since he's been on the roster. So he really makes a difference. And I think the amount of points that their defense allows, I think, is 7 points higher or something on average per game with him not in there. I think it changes from I don't know, somewhere in the mid to low 20s down to 17 with him in there or something like that. So it's crazy how much of a difference maker he is. So that's the way I look at those games, man. My plays one more time today. The 3 plays that I have are in the NFL in the night game there. Philadelphia Eagles -2.5. I got on that quite a while ago. In the NBA, Chicago Bulls +4. And in hockey, Seattle Kraken +128. Those are my 3 plays for today, man. Let's get it done. Let's get back on the winning side. I had a good Saturday. Sunday, I think all 3 of my plays were kind of the correct plays to make, and only one of them got there. The Tulsa one was so unbelievably frustrating. You don't even know. I'm so sick of so many of these college basketball teams that I've been on recently having huge leads in the middle of the second half, and it looks like this game is, it's done. Like, this is going to be a win, and then it winds up not being a win at all. And BYU almost became that way too. It's just so crazy, like how it can just happen game after game like this. So that's going to do it for me, man. Have a good Monday. I don't know if it's a holiday for the rest of you. It is for me. So long weekend. Woo! Peace out.